Hello, today we have three platforms. Here in the studio, in the Lugansk Regional Museum of Local Lore and 160 kilometers away from here in Donetsk. Moreover, we are on the line with Moscow now. As we know, on June the 1st, the entire civilized world celebrates Children's Day. In our peaceful pre-war childhood, we ran around the courtyards and on the streets playing soldiers. It was just a game. We did not have any secret intention or any fears. We played just for fun, but why even then few of us wanted to play for our enemies, for the fascists? In the 21st century, the children of Donbass have not played soldiers for 7 years. They live in war. And all those imaginary enemies and fascists became real. And they did not come from somewhere. They did not come from another country, but from one that was once common for all of us. They came and took our childhood or even life.
The whole world has been rocked by the speech of the Ukrainian guarantor Poroshenko. All news agencies and TV channels quoted the bloody ruler. Perhaps this is the only Poroshenko's promises which he successfully kept during his presidential term. Promises of war, death, basements and destruction. And then the daily cannonade of Ukrainian artillery, airstrikes, rocket launchers, Grad, Smerch and Uragan. Every Ukrainian missile and bomb destroyed and killed. For 7 years of the Donbass war, or such Ukraine calls it ATO or GVO, more than 2,000 civilians of the Lugansk People's Republic were killed. Ukrainian missiles took the lives of 35 children who were definitely not separatists and terrorists. They didn't participate in the referendum on 11th of May 2014 and they don't deserve such a childhood.
They destroy houses and kill people. It's terrifying. They shattered windows of our bedroom and kitchen. There are dents on the facade of our house.
Do you think kids deserve to know what war is?
No. They are still too small to know what war is. They will be scared.
Neither children's fear nor even children's death have ever stopped and don't stop the rulers of Ukraine. They have only one goal: to exterminate Donbass people.
Guys, we bow down before you as you save us from all sorts of scum. Thank you so much. We have a complicated and in many ways difficult issue, and today we will hear their opinions, assessments and personal stories not only of senior generation, but also of children who are at such young age learned what war is. They are learning to understand military issues and even to distinguish the type and the direction of shells by sound. First, I would like to give the floor to our friends in Donetsk. Our platform, dear friends, you have the floor, we are listening to you. Hello, we are the residents of the DPR. We will not discover America, but we will open the eyes of the whole world to the grief of our peaceful people, what they have suffered from Ukraine since 2014. I would like to ask the DPR child right advisor Eleonora Fedorenko to do this in detail.
Hello, Lugansk. Hello, Moscow. It's no coincidence that on June 1st, Children's Day, we push the issue war and children. Just listen to these words. Children are joy, happiness, hope for the future, laughter, games, family, mom and dad. And what is war? Today, there are 6 of my guys next to me, each of whom knows what war is. Each of them knows loss, knows pain. For 7 years, our guys in Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic do not feel safe. They don't have the opportunity to have fun, to plan, to run on the green spring grass carefree, without fear of explosions. During the 7 years of the war, the Donetsk People's Republic has lost more than 100 children, 93. This number is confirmed by documents. Further war continues on and on, every day. 263 children were injured. 43 became disabled. Terrible numbers. If we take into account the casualties among the civilian population, it becomes clear that terror is a favorite pastime of the Ukro-fascists. It's awful, you know? Today we are with families who have lost a child, whose children have been injured, whose daughters and sons have died. Their homes have been destroyed. Tell me, what other misfortunes should happen to us? What else do these children have to endure for the world to hear us?
Yes, there are children here who can confirm every letter, every comma, every point with their life stories. We'll talk to them now. I understand that these can be difficult. These are already grown children. They will tell their stories and introduce themselves.
It's no easy for Grandma. Hello, I'm the grandmother of this child and her guardian as well, since Diana remained a complete orphan. In 2014, in August, their car was shot on the way home. Her entire family and her second grandmother perished in front of a 4-year-old child. She was there for another day and saw it all. She saw dead parents, but she believed they were asleep, and only on the second day she was wounded. Her mother successfully hit her. She was wounded in the arm. There was a soldier nearby. She was with him at night, and in the morning, when she felt sick from being wounded, he asked the local residents for help. They were in the field, in the steppe, literally, and the residents called the DPR People's Militia. They arrived and immediately took her to a hospital in Donetsk. There, doctors operated on her wound. And only then they found me by accident. She was alone. And the documents. Her mother, when she was already dying, told about them to the soldier who was nearby there. He took the documents of the eldest girl, and on these documents, via the internet, they found her. Volunteers put all this on the internet, and only 2 days later, I found out about what had happened and found Diana in the hospital. It's hard to talk about this, and of course, I still can't come to terms with it and understand why the child was left an orphan. Why in one day, in an instant, did she lose her whole family? Now don't know joy at home anyone. We had a big family. We all gathered together for holidays, birthdays, and now half of the table is empty. It's too hard. And Diana, you can imagine what a 4-year-old child went through. All this was in front of her eyes. Cursed be the war. I will not wish such a fate on anyone.
Sasha Lutsenko, the child was wounded. The eldest child in the family and the grandmother were killed during shelling by the armed formations of Ukraine. The father died defending the Donetsk People Republic. Sasha, you have the floor. Thank you. Mom will help.
Hello, my name is Lutsenko Lyubov Alexandrovna. I am a Sasha's mother. Our story is as follows. In 2014, in the city of Kirovska, there was an attack on August 24. It was the Independence Day of Ukraine. On this day, 2 of my children suffered. Sasha and my other son, Denis, who at the time was 5 years old. Unfortunately, Denis didn't survive after being wounded. He didn't come out of coma. We fought for his life for a month and a half in Donetsk. But we didn't save the child. Sasha survived multiple shrapnel wounds. He was operated on 3 times in Russia and twice in Donetsk. The child has a serious psychological trauma. I just have one question. You know, for those who do all this, does it make you feel better? Do you feel better when mothers lose? I'm not talking only about myself. Adult mothers lose their sons, lose daughters, lose husbands, grandmothers and grandfathers. What is all this for? What do you want to achieve? I don't understand how long this will continue and how long everyone will be afraid to hear the sound of shelling every time. Even Sasha is afraid when he hears a loud sound. He immediately asks, "Mom, what is this?" The child will remember this for the rest of his life. Sasha is covered in scars after operations, after being wounded. He has shrapnel wounds all over his body, big, small, doesn't matter. But the child will remember this for the rest of his life. We lost our dad in 2017. He was on the front line and also didn't survive the attacks from Ukraine. If we have such an opportunity to get through to the people, reach out to them. Help! Stop it all! How many more lives does it take to stop everything?
Елизавета Bondarenko, born in 2013, was injured in 2014 by the bombardment by the armed formations of Ukraine. Dad will probably help us to tell. Hello, my name is Denis Bondarenko. I'm the father of Liza Bondarenko. In 2014, on Sunday 27th, we all went to the store. Liza at that time was only 8 months old. And this was the first bombardment of Gorlovka. We came under fire. I returned home only with Liza. Our mother, my wife, she died on the spot from a shrapnel wound to the neck. Liza received shrapnel wound to the head, and I was also wounded. The question is of course interesting one, but where does all this hatred from Ukraine towards us come from? I don't know. Does it make it easier to live, or how is it? And another question, for those Ukrainians who say, well, we are not like that, do you think they won't come after you? We continue, although it's hard for all of us. Milana and Sofia Radchenko, 2 children, were injured in 2020, recently, quite recently, as a result of shelling by armed formations of Ukraine. Who's going to talk, guys?
Hello, I am Olga Viktorovna Radchenko. The girls were injured on the 4th of May, 2020. They were walking in the courtyard of the house. There was a thunderstorm, lightning, hail, and under this noise they fired on the Ilyich quarter. Injuries. Sofia was wounded in the head, face, arm, leg. Milana was wounded in the lower back, in the leg. A shell fragment remained in the leg, head and arms. It's not clear why they suffer. Cannot go for a walk. Our children see nothing. We want peace, tranquility. Let's hope for better, for humanity. That's all. Thank you.
Well, we are all TV people and we know that there is never enough time. We have very little time, but a lot of grief. Oля Pronicheva, the child, received a severe hand injury as the result of firing and is now constantly undergoing rehabilitation. Will her mom speak?
My name is Oля Pronicheva. I am 13 years old and I live in the city of Yasinovate. In 2014, On August 12th, my dad and I went for a walk not far from our house. We went to buy ice cream, made some purchases, and sat down on a bench. A shell landed not far from us, and my father's employee was killed, and I was wounded. I went through a lot. There were 4 operations, and I am constantly undergoing rehabilitation. Thank you.
It's hard to hear that. Alexander, you have the floor. Yes, Dmitri, I completely agree with you. When we hear such terrible revelations, testimonies and memories, we better understand the statistics in Ukraine. It is official. One of the 5 Ukrainian soldiers committed suicide, unable to withstand the oppression of conscience. It becomes clear why, and of course, they also know where their shells sometimes land. They have the internet and the ears, and many can't stand it. There are physical material evidence of Ukrainian crimes in our Museum of Local Lore. I want to give them the floor. Anastasia Cherinova, my colleague, works there, and there are also Lugansk people next to her who also have something to say. Anastasia, please, we are listening to you.
Hello, Alexander. Yes, we see and hear our misfortune friends, and we have something to say. Now I would like to give the floor to the participants of our platform. These are people, residents of the frontline regions, and they will share the memories of the terrible events of 2014. Please introduce yourself. Hello, I'm Valentina Nikolaevna Shevchenko, Deputy Director for Educational Work of Zolotovskaya Secondary School No. 4, named after Roman Salkov, which is on the contact line. The soldiers of the armed force of Ukraine are at 800 meters from us. Consequently, children are under the gun of the Ukrainian armed forces. And in our school, there is already a chronicle of crimes, atrocities of the hands of the Nazis, whose victims were our children. I can quickly name some of them. Although this is by no means all. On 13th of October 2017, on a beautiful Indian summer day, in the midst of complete silence, suddenly a mine sent by the Nazis explodes in the courtyard of a house. And at the same time, our school leaver Kovtun Anastasia and her mother die. On April 14th, 2019, a 5th grader sitting at a computer was shell-shocked in her own apartment because a mine exploded right outside the window. Shell fragments flew throughout the apartment. The girl had a brain injury. On September 28, 2020, a 7th grader receives a severe concussion from a mine explosion. The result is a traumatic cataract of the right eye, which is actually blindness. Recently, in the village of Mikhailovka, there has been constant shelling, especially at night. A colleague of mine recently witnessed the following picture. Ukrainian fascists slightly changed their tactics. There is a stream of bullets, people run away with children, with strollers, and a little girl runs. She doesn't know where to hide. Under the tree, under the wall, and shouts, "Mom, I'm scared." I express the opinion of the Zolotoye residents. People, hear us. Especially I appeal to those whose heads are drugged with this informational lie. The war is not over. The war continues. Our children are hostage of hostilities. Children are suffering. Please, be sensible. It's impossible to call everyone Homo sapiens. Ukrainian fascists cannot be called by this word. They are barbarians. Stop. And let God's judgment, if not worldly judgment, overtake you. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to our guest from another frontline region. Please, introduce yourself. Gutyria Larisa Dmitrievna, Deputy Director for Educational Work of Branka No. 20. The peak of hostilities in the village of Yuzhnaya Lamovatka fell in the fall of 2014. But in spite of this situation, classes continued at school. Many parents took their children and left. Some went to Russia, some to Ukraine, but most of the population remained on the territory of the village. The children went to school every morning. Some with parents, some without parents, but everyone went to school, and the parents who accompanied the children waited for them until the end of the class. Because they were afraid to leave them alone, they took them away and took them home. If shelling started during classes, we took the children to the bomb shelter, which was located at the school. It was scary to look at those children who were sitting quiet, calm and frightened. My parents were children of war, but I would never have thought that in the 21st century my own grandchildren would also be children of war. The only difference is that in the past we were attacked by a foreign state, but here the native state kills its children. Kills people, destroys, robs, destroys houses, schools and kindergartens. This cannot be forgiven and cannot be forgotten. Galina Slobodyan, director of the Center for Extracurricular Activities in Kierovsk, Bluebird. I want to say that the shells flew purposefully at the educational institutions of our city. Almost all educational institutions were damaged by these shells. During its operation, our center came under fire twice. On the 3rd of November 2014 and the 2nd of January 2015, several shells exploded near the building of our institution. In the same way, all the windows were knocked out, the roof was damaged, the doors were knocked out, but the staff of our institution didn't stop their work. We filled the windows with the materials at hand and continued to work. We instilled confidence and hope for the future in our children, helped them overcome fear. We really want this war to end. We want our children to live in peace. Please help us. Thank you for your speech. I, in turn, want to know that we are now in the rather symbolic place, the Lugansk Regional Museum. Here is an exposition dedicated to the events taking place in Donbass since 2014. Here are presented rifles, pistols, and along with them unexploded shells, rockets from multiple launch rocket systems, as indisputable proof of the Ukrainian government crimes. And now I want to give the floor to the Deputy of the People's Council of the Lugansk People's Republic, Svetlana Gizay. It's very difficult to speak. Of course, being in such place, recalling the events that have taken place in our country since 2014. I would like to say that the international community is silent and doesn't protect our children. Ukraine is pursuing an aggressive policy against the children of Donbass. I want the world community to hear us and assesses the actions that Ukraine is taking against the civilian population and especially our children. I want to say that there are many organizations that are obliged to protect the rights of our children, regardless of the place they live, the territory or the state. The United Nations was specially created, which is obliged to come to any point and protect the rights of the civilian population and, of course, children. I ask the world community to turn its face to us, hear us, and protect the rights of our children. Our children are not different from others. After all children are equal in their rights. No one should ever aim at our children. We will always fight back, always. Our children will be happy, healthy, and live in peace. And I wish everyone peace in the world. We thank you. Alexander, you have the floor.
Anastasia, I want to address the representative of the LPR in the subgroup on humanitarian issues of the contact group, the head of the LPR working group on the exchange of war prisoners, deputy of the LPR People's Council, Olga Koptseva. Olga Anatolyevna, tell us please, what are the main fundamental international legal foundations in the field of protecting the rights and lives of children? Please, you have the floor.
I would like to note that the following fact, that the war that began in 2014 was, first of all, declared against the civilian population, and children were no exception in this war. I want to emphasize that given the particular vulnerability of children, the 1949 Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols establish a number of specific rules that provide children with special protection. But alas, the Ukrainian government ignored these norms and trampled on these norms. And trampled not without the support of Western partners. The blood of the dead children lies on them too. I will voice some sad figures. Over the entire period of the conflict, 35 children have died in our country. 35 lives that could have continued. Now Anna Borisovna has shown some photographs. These are the children who were playing. In reality, the children died. Some of them came under the gun of Ukrainian guns. And some of the children died because, due to their carelessness, they didn't understand what unexploded shells were. I have to name the following figure: 88. 88, unfortunately, we still have wounded children. The children were injured, and the trauma they received during this conflict, and the conflict continues, has left a deep imprint on their fate. I will give you an example. In 2015, we had the first exchange of the Lugansk People's Republic with the Ukrainian side. As part of this exchange, a student was released. Maxim, 16 years old. It was a lucky break. We found out purely by chance. Mom managed to call me on the phone and tell me that her child was being held in the Starobelsk SIZO. Maxim was lucky. In a cell with adults, with criminals who were convicted on criminal charges, he spent only 2 months. On the 10th of July, Maxim was released. Maxim's fate was successful. Parents are divorced. The father, having learned about the incident, expressed a desire to take the boy to him and took him to Russia. But apparently, the war made its own adjustments in the choice of profession, and Maxim went to study to be a military man. I also want to know that we have a sad page. When in June 2014, children were sent to Odessa. Orphans who were under care. They were sent to rest. And no matter how we fought for those children, no matter how hard we tried to exert influence, even pressure on the Ukrainian side, those children will not return home. The correspondence with these children continues to this day. Unfortunately, there are sad statistics that we don't know the fate of many of them. And we don't know this for one simple reason. The children were adopted abroad. They are no longer citizens of Ukraine, and their further fate remains unknown. There are children who managed to escape from the territory of Ukraine, but these are only a few. They managed to return here to Lugansk, and what these children said was the children were used. Girls and boys were used in sexual slavery. They were forced to steal and engage in, let's say, dirtiness. Therefore, taking into account the Children's Day, I would like to draw the attention of the world community to the disgrace, to the crime that the Ukrainian government was allowed to do in relation to the Donbass residents and in relation to the Donbass children.
Yes, thank you, Olga Anatolyevna. Indeed, when commenting on dry statistical facts, regulatory legal acts, it is difficult to keep a cold mind when discussing such a topic. Colleagues, now we will have the opportunity to speak. I see, Anna Borisovna, you wanted to add something. You are welcome.
I would like to tell a few more words about the city Zolotoye 5, about the wonderful school number 4, and say, you understand, this is not just what the representative of the school has just said. We saw such terrible pictures when a child leaves school. The school is located with the back side to the front line. And the exit from the school, it's in the shade. And the children go out and they are afraid to turn around the corner of the school. A child comes out and stands and waits. To be honest, at first, when we went there for the first year, we didn't understand what was happening. And then we realized the child either waits for his parents or waits for a few minutes, listens if there is a shelling or there is no shelling. Indeed, these are chaotic shelling, more than 52 times already. These are only bullet hits on the school. Where those people were shooting, I don't understand. They are literally 500 meters away. They see perfectly. Snipers and gunners are sitting. They can see perfectly well that this is a school. This is the 8th year.
Anna Borisovna, as a lawyer, tell us, do I understand it right that this indiscriminate shelling is one of the criteria for qualifying a war crime?
Of course, this is an aggravating circumstance. Chaotic shelling of civilian objects when a school, and is designed as a school in the first place. And when we showed the photo, Anastasia Kovtun, not only she was killed by a criminal mind, but also the funeral took place in the center of the city under fire.
Thank you, Anna Borisovna. Andrei Vyacheslamovich, I see you wanted to react. You are welcome. In the old Soviet film by Leonid Bykov, At the Bate the soldiers were walking, there is a line: men don't cry, men get upset. So I will allow myself to play in a different role. Alexander Valerievich asked a question. I will answer him in the dry language of international legal acts. Because experts know the Geneva Convention, the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, but most people, I'm sure, have never read them. So I am reading two articles. Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 38, adopted by UN General Assembly on November 20, 1989. State parties undertake to respect and ensure compliance with the rules of international humanitarian law applicable to them in the event of armed conflict and of relevance to children. Paragraph 4 of the same article. During armed conflicts, the participating states undertake to take all possible measures to ensure the protection and care of children affected by the armed conflict. And one more comment. Principle 10, the last principle of the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, was adopted, if I'm not mistaken, in 1959. The child must be guarded against practices that may encourage racial, religious, or some other forms of discrimination. He or she must be brought up in the spirit of mutual understanding, tolerance, friendship among nations, peace and universal brotherhood, and so in full consciousness that his energy and abilities should be developed to serve others for the benefit of others. The contrast is clear. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrei Vyacheslamovich. Olga Anatolyevna, you wanted to add something else, right?
I would like to add briefly everything that is now listed. Today we have the following fact. The United Nations completely ignores human rights violations, children's rights violations, and in the reports that they publish today, unfortunately, these statistics are not noted. It's marked vaguely.
It is said that history is cyclical and develops in the spiral, or as Mark Twain said, history rhymes. And now, we have already talked about this today. There are people who understand more deeply than others what it is like when war takes away their childhood away from them. I'm talking about the children of war who understood what a real war is 80 years ago.
Children, war. Is it possible to combine these two concepts? Is a battlefield, a concentration camp or a house destroyed by a shell a place for children? 1,418 terrible days of the Great Patriotic War showed that the war doesn't have mercy on anyone. For millions of boys and girls, war has crippled their fate. Millions of children fell victim to Nazi atrocities. Thousands were killed by the Nazis before they were even born. For the Nazis, children were part of the racial struggle. They were killed and maimed as well as adults. Medical experiments were performed on the children. Children were even killed with toys. They were stuffed with explosives and dropped from planes. To all of this, hunger, cold, and death. If anyone was left alive, they were used as labor force in forced labor camps. How many innocent children died during the Great Patriotic War is still unknown. The scientific literature says that on the territory of the USSR, the Nazis purposefully killed more than 216,000 boys and girls. But in fact, the number of deaths is much higher.
It is probably safe to say that every veteran living now, every child of the Great Patriotic War, is an inexhaustible treasure of history. Their history is both a memory and evidence of the crimes that were committed against them. And listening to such people, you can understand better than even some historians or experts what happened then, how scary it was. In our studio there is such a person, Nikolai Prokofyevich Sobol. I ask you to share your memories and impressions. Please, you have the floor. I am Nikolai Prokofyevich Sobol. I was born in the village of Raigorodka, Svatovsky district, Lugansk region. War, I want to say, this is grief, this is destruction, this is tears. During the war, they took my father and two of my older brothers to the front. We are the children. We didn't take up arms. We didn't fight, but we were so friendly. We helped those families where the men went to the front. We helped plant potatoes, graze cows, and tear the grass for them. And we were so friendly, so attentive. Therefore, I want to say that I was born in Donbass, studied, grew up, and I want to wish. Let failures not break you. There will be more gifts of fate. I wish you to smile more often and forget all your hardships. All the children want to wish you long years and success in your work. Let failures not break you, and everything will be fine with you, as they say. Nikolai Prokofyevich, thank you. Thank you for visiting us today. Indeed, war through the eyes of a child is the most terrible picture that can only be. It is not for nothing. I repeat once again, that scary film on the topic, Come and See, filmed about a child, about fate. Through his eyes, the viewer sees what is happening in the film. And on the second side, we have the opportunity to hear the opinion of a child who is not just caught in the war, but who is truly the daughter of the regiment, more precisely, the Ghost Battalion. Anastasia, I would like to appeal to you and say that you give us the opportunity to hear the opinion of Bogdana Nishiret. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, of course, Alexander. Bogdana is now at our side. I give the floor, she will share her emotions and memories. You are welcome. When the war began, it was 2014. I was 8 years old. And even then, I realized that our people are invincible in general. I'll tell you the story of my life. The war began and we went to school not on September 1st, but on October 1st. We were all in the classroom and the shelling began very hard. And the teachers, all the children, began to gather us. And they understood, the little ones, but even then they understood that we were not being let out into the street to walk on a sunny day, but that now we would need to hide in the basements. And we, like little sparrows, were afraid. Our class teacher heard us. She told us, "Calm down, everything is fine." We walked, and at that time our director was going down the steps. And I looked at her and saw that she was smiling, and there were tears in her eyes. Then, since I was little, I didn't pay attention, but I remembered this situation very much. And only when I grew up, I realized that the director was smiling because she wanted us not to be afraid, and her eyes were crying because she was afraid for our lives. And I will tell you one more story that touches me very much all the time. I started writing poetry, and later on I was invited to Donetsk, to the village of Petrovskaya, to tell the civilians who have to hide in basements all day long. And then there was a heavy downpour, but I, like all children, loved to look out the window on trips. And I saw that there were a large number of waste heaps, and a very bombed waste heap attracted my attention. And then I realized that this waste heap reminds me of the silhouette of a hunched-over old man. And due to the fact that there was a very heavy downpour, streams ran along it, and they reminded me of tears. And then I said that in the Donbass, not only the earth is crying, but even the waste heaps are crying. We, the children of Donbass, and all adults really want the war to end as soon as possible.
We are in touch with the assistant of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Lugansk People's Republic, Vitaly Kiselyov. Vitaly Viktorovich, earlier you defended our people in the battlefield, and now you continue to do so in the informational field. Tell us, please, how do you see the results of your future group? Today, the war as it is positional, so observing the Minsk agreement, we are kind of overstepping our pride, and the Ukrainian fascists, they have neither honor nor conscience, they have nothing. Fascists are fascists. Therefore, it was decided to create some kind of weapon that can continue our fight against the fascists. That is why we created the project, the Byzantine Way, anti-Nazi, in which we expose all the crimes of Ukrainian Nazis, and not only them, but also the Ukrainian leaders and all those who directly support terrorist activity. And for me, it became a continuation of war, but in the informational field. Thank you very much. History shows that crimes against children have no limits to their cruelty, and the assistant professor of the Department of History and Pedagogy of the Lugansk State Agrarian University, candidate of Historical Sciences, Associate Professor Alexander Ladyga, will tell us about this. Alexander Ivanovich, you have the floor. Yes, it is very difficult, in fact, to work with these materials, and after plunging into them, then you fall ill for several days, physically. And a lot of parallels rush through my head. Listening to witnesses, listening to eyewitnesses, listening to the statistics. I would like to mention the well-known children's camp Salaspils, about which there are so many nuances and difficulties. Indeed, according to official data, still Soviet data, more than 12,000 children passed through it. But in Novosibirsk, there were found people with the number above 17,000. In total, colleagues, 17,073 people were found. This is until the 90s, before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Galina Ivanovna, did you want to add something? You're welcome.
You know, colleagues, when I listened to all the previous speeches, I caught myself thinking about what sounds continuously. War childhood, children of war. It seems to me that at the beginning of the 21st century, this is more than strange. Because humanity by this time has already passed such epochs as the era of Renaissance, where the principle of humanism, the era of reason, the era of enlightenment were once proclaimed. And we're still talking about the fact that in the 20th and early 21st centuries, virtually all generations living at this stage, they faced war. Let's remember 1914th year, the First World, and in the subsequent, a crippled generation. And then 1941, and again, a new crippled generation of children of the war, parents, who will then transfer it to the future life. Well, now our war is 2014, a civil war that brought such a number of disasters. When I was thinking about this topic, International Children's Day, I decided to determine for myself what was common in the Great Patriotic War for the children of the war and what is now for our modern children. I identified several lines where I found both common and different. Well, it seems to me that we will start with the general. This is genocide. That is, in fact, if in the 41st and so on, until the 45th, in fact, Germany and its allies cleared the territory of the Soviet Union in order to free up space for the true Aryans, then nowadays we have repeatedly heard that all whoever doesn't want to, you get out of this territory. And everyone who remains, we will clear this space. That is, the question is about the territory. And this implies genocide, that is physical extermination. I think the line is clearly visible. In addition, if we are talking about genocide, then let's define by what criteria we define it. Of course, this is a question of nationality, political affiliation and place of residence. That is, well, again, somewhere we find similarities. It should be noted that just as in the Great Patriotic War, and now, of course, systems of offensive, non-selective action were used, which brought innumerable disasters, of course, death. Well, of course, artillery attacks, and that is there and there. Well, numbers have already been sounded here, but still, let me name them again. 27 million people died in the Great Patriotic War, of which 17 million, according to some estimates, 15 million were civilians. Who were they? First of all, women and children. Although officially it's somewhere around 216,000 children. I think these are clearly underestimated figures. At the same time, I would like to name our war that distinguishes us from that terrible war. Of course, our war has been going on for the 8th year, and so far we don't see the end. Yes. That war lasted 4 years, 1418 days and nights, and nevertheless, the children of the Soviet people had to go through and be the sons of their regiment in this war. Thank God our children don't directly participate in hostilities. Those children, as Alexander Ivanovich presented to us now, were actually victims of concentration camps.
Please, Sergei Alexandrovich, complete it. I will make a small remark. For example, our people did not become prisoners of concentration camps. They simply were not created and, shall we say, they were designed territorially. But Olga Anatolievna will not let me lie. This information was submitted for both, roughly speaking, for national discussion. This is the situation with the rape of children in the city of Shasty. This is the crime of the Tornado Battalion, which even in the closest mode was tried in Ukraine, which perfectly showed that in this case there is no need to rely on Ukrainian domestic legislation and the judicial system, because even the quotes from the case which got to public domain and were described as crimes, in some places surpassed even the crimes of the Nazis and fascists from 41-45. And in principle, they have already approached the level of the organization of Ukrainian nationalist ferocities. That is, similar cases when on the territory of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, which are currently occupied by Ukraine, crimes against children were committed on a fairly massive scale. They have a place to be. But another question, yes, there were no concentration camps directly. Although, in principle, by and large, the territories where especially nationalist battalions entered, well, they turned into certain concentration camps completely. Let me make a small remark from myself. If I mention Salaspils and drew some parallels, then you know what a parallel I have. Now, around Salaspils in the Baltic states, some movements are emerging, which in fact are aimed at trying to justify those people who tortured children during the Great Patriotic War. There are really some public organizations that are actually trying to substantiate the idea that the children were there on their free will, and that they were almost treated there here. And to be honest, I have a parallel both immediately with the fact that we are bombarding ourselves. Firstly, and with the large-scale policy of whitewashing, or an attempt to mitigate the guilt of Ukrainian criminals who collaborated with the Nazis at that time. Here I have such parallels. And about the fact that we talked about the fact that the world community looks through its fingers or sometimes turns away from what is happening here. Well, really, let's remember that at Nuremberg trials, some Nazi criminals for a long time felt confident enough, until the judges, among other things, were shown a film of what they did. And then the European Court simply could not somehow turn away from it. Today, our program will eventually be translated into several languages. I hope it will also become somehow, let us say, water that wears away the stone, some kind of informational event. The one that will force someone against not to turn away from it. Here you are. If there are some more opinions, if not, we'll continue further. I would like to address Donetsk. Colleagues, how can you hear us? And I have a question for you. How is the situation on the front line in general? How is the childhood of children at home who are directly on the vicinity or next to the demarcation line, disturbed by war at the moment? Please, you have the floor. We hear you well. The situation is tense. Natalia Begunenko, the head of the Petrovsky district administration of Donetsk, will tell you more about this. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Indeed, the situation in the Petrovsky district, which is located near the contact line, remains difficult. The shelling has continued since 2014. Residential areas, including school and kindergartens, are being bombarded. In May, a kindergarten was fired at, and by happy accident, the children were not injured, as the teachers managed to get the children into the institution. Shelling of schools is underway. Our children know firsthand how by sound determine the caliber of the projectile and where it will land. It's creepy, scary. Only in May did a residential building burn down. House buildings suffered, which were restored by people after the shelling. And again, there is destruction. The kids are scared. It's namely the cynical shelling of residential areas, social facilities, intimidation of people, including our children. For 7 years, we have been under fire, and every day, every night, explosions are heard. This is very scary, scary for our children, but they are wonderful, the best. We appeal to all people. Look at our children. See what they are and stop this shelling.
Colleagues, another speech by Svetlana Chernyshenko, a chief of staff for work with the frontline areas of the Donetsk Republic public movement. The floor is hers.
In my life, I have 2 dreams, probably like many living in the Donbass. When the war ends, and the second, when the Nazis will answer for their actions.
Анастасия, скажите, а что ваши эксперты в студии скажут по этому
Every
поводу?
time,
Какие прогнозы, какие,
traveling
может
to the
быть, мысли на этот
frontline
счет есть?
territories,
Да, спасибо,
every
Александр.
family,
Хочу
every
передать
child
слово
is a crippled faith.
председателю общественной организации Патриотической
children
ассоциации
injured.
Донбасс Алексею Селиванову. Он находится
Many
рядом со мной. Алексей
children
Сергеевич,
killed.
вам слово.
Хочется сказать не
And
только
many children
о
who received
не только тех
psychological
преступлениях,
disease,
которые совершаются в отношении детей Донбасса, но и в отношении детей
severe
той
forms
части,
of
которая сегодня
diabetes
находится под контролем
mellitus
киевской власти.
are the serious diseases against
Нынешняя
the
Украина,
background
она
of shelling.
воспроизводит вот этот вот
You know, when
образец
people come to
поведения
you and you
карательных
communicate
негодяев,
with
традиционного
them,
убийства,
the
что
children press
неизбежно
against their
потом
parents, and everyone
даст
smells of
свои
basements
сходы
and
и в
them.
Европе, и у нас в очередной.
Because only
Имеет
2-3
смысл
hours a day they
постоянно
can
напоминать
calmly
международному
move.
сообществу
For
и о
instance, in
преступлениях, которые
Novoalexandrovka, The same is in Куйбышевский district. Ясиноватая, Минеральная, Старомихайловка, Киевский, the 9 villages of the Novoazovsky district, the 12 villages of Gorlov. The front line is very large. 6,650 children live in this territory. Only on the front line, 5,600 of them are minors.
То, чем занимаются наши
More than
правоохранительные органы,
300
следственные органы Российской Федерации,
remained
общественные
orphans,
организации у нас на территории,
parents
когда собирают,
couldn't
фиксируют и
bear
сохраняют
the
факты преступлений. И вот это,
hardships
вот, мне
of the
кажется,
war.
должно быть тем дамокловым мечом,
Many
который
of them
постоянно
had
будет висеть над теми людьми,
cardiac
которые, я надеюсь, все равно в итоге так или иначе понесут
Now,
тот или
these
иной вид
children are
наказания.
under the care of
Я
their
хотел бы
relatives.
обратиться, у нас в студии
I
присутствует
don't know what language
уполномоченный по
still
правам
needs to
ребенка
be
Луганской Народной
translated
Республики Юлия
so that
Ивановна
we can be
Назаренко.
heard.
Юлия Ивановна, я хотел
We
бы
can
спросить
be
вас,
seen
какие
and
вообще
our
механизмы,
children can
какие
stay
нормы, да, какие правила,
alive.
возможности у нас существуют для того, чтобы сейчас уже вот помочь этим детям, у
Then
которых, ну, по сути, украли
it's hard
детство
for
или
me
его
to
испортили.
talk.
То есть
Thank
чем мы
you.
можем сейчас помочь, на основании чего нашим детям? Пожалуйста, вам слово.
Another comment by Ekaterina Nikolaevna Skolkina, head of the Department of Practical Psychology of the Social Work of the State Institution Donetsk Republican Educational and Methodological Center for the Psychological Service of the Education System. Just 1 minute, please.
Firstly, I would like to remind you that today is a holiday of the 1st of June, Children's Day. And despite the fact that this is a holiday, the atmosphere here in the studio on our side is very painful.
Спасибо, Юлия Ивановна. Лидия Владимировна,
like
да, я
a
видел,
loss.
вы хотели
Grief
высказаться.
lived.
Пожалуйста, слово.
People cry here, live because it's difficult to talk about it. I look at the children who are present here in the studio. They have suffered severe physical, bodily injuries, serious psychological shocks. I feel the pain of the parents who came here, but how many parents who cannot talk about this very difficult topic? And it's impossible to respond to this pain. And this is uncertainty first drives people, children and their parents to a dead end. Our war has days of 2040 and triplets, and until this triplet is completed, it will be difficult. I want to return to the fact that today is Children's Day. Let's create these conditions so that they feel protected. Thank you.
This is the situation, Alexander. That's how we live. The floor is yours. Thank you, Donetsk. Anastasia, tell me, what will your experts in the studio say about this? What are the forecasts? What are the thoughts about it?
Yes, thank you, Alexander. I want to convey the floor to the chairman of the public organization Patriotic Association of Donbass, Alexei Selivanov. He's next to me. Alexei Sergeyevich, your word.
I would like to say not only about those crimes that are committed against the children of Donbass, but also in relation to the children of that part which is today under the control of Kiev authorities, and thus Ukraine, the current Ukraine. It reproduces here a model of behavior of punisher and villains, scoundrels and murderers, which is inevitable. Then it will give its seeds in Europe and with us as well. It makes sense to constantly remind the international community of the crimes that the Ukrainian government is committing against the children in Donbass and in general the crimes that this government is committing on the territory of the former Soviet Republic of Ukraine. I am absolutely sure that I think that our colleagues are absolutely confident that as in the 45th year these people will inevitably be punished and the materials of criminal cases will be collected against them. The practice of the Ukrainian regime will be condemned and stopped.
Thank you, Alexey Sergeyevich. We all hope for it. Alexander, I give the floor to your experts.
The things our law enforcement agencies and the investigative committee of the Russian Federation are doing, public organizations in our territory, when they collect, record and preserve the facts of the crimes, this seems to be that Damocles sword that will be constantly hanging over those who, this or that way, will suffer from this another type of punishment. I'd like to turn to the studio. Here is the Commissioner for the Rights of the Child of the Lugansk People's Republic, Yulia Ivanovna Nazarenko. Yulia Ivanovna, I would like to ask you here, what modalities, what are the norms, what opportunities do we have in order to help these children whose childhood has actually been stolen or ruined? That is, how can we help now? On what basis can we help our children? Please, the floor is yours.
For most foreign politicians, the death, tragedy of the children of Donbass doesn't mean anything. The world community was blinded and deaf when it came to the issue of genocide over the citizens of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic. In the Lugansk People's Republic, all institutions and all tools have been created that allow the realization and protection of the rights of every child living in our territory.
Thank you, Yulia Ivanovna. Lydia Vladimirovna, right? I saw you wanted to speak. Please, the word to you.
Our city, Bryanka, is a frontline city. It's located near the location of the armed forces of Ukraine. And therefore, from the first days of the war, our city was fired at and quite heavily. There were also destruction of private house buildings and the executive committee. The building of the executive committee was badly damaged. Our clinic was damaged as well. I remember this day when I came to work on the 8th of February 2015 year and saw all these broken windows. The roof was damaged, and only thanks to the huge tree we have there in front of the clinic, and the shell hit right into the street, and there was not a direct hit. But we remained in our places, didn't leave anywhere, and continued to provide medical assistance to our residents. It was especially scary, believe me, when you go on your duty and you know that there will be this shelling. Mostly fired at us at night. Constant descents into bomb shelters with sick children, with mothers. This war, of course, left an imprint on our children. Especially in the early years of the war, there were a lot of appeals about neurosis, nervous tics, and mental disorders. But time treats. Children adapt to this environment. Although this is certainly not normal. Why should our children suffer? Why? You ask yourself this question all the time. But I hope that in the end, all this will end, and a peaceful, normal life will come. And the health of our children will recover. And we will make every effort to make this happen as soon as possible, and peace will come on our earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia Vladimirovna. Colleagues from Donetsk, I want to address you. We've heard a lot of speeches on the topic. Yulia Ivanovna spoke about the modes for protection and ensuring the rights of children. Tell us, what events do you have in this area? How are the things? What modes and potential to protect childhood, to smooth the consequences that unfortunately children have suffered now exist and are being worked in Donetsk People's Republic? You have a word, please. Yes, we will ask the deputy of the People's Council of the Donetsk People's Republic, Елена Шишкина, to tell about this.
Good afternoon, Lugansk. Good afternoon, Moscow. Greet everyone who is in our studio. I want to know that our meeting is taking place in the Museum of Patriotic Education of the Petrovsky district. Roman Yevstefeev collected this museum back in 2014. I want to congratulate everyone on the International Day for the Protection of Children and wish children, parents, parents and us all peace. Let's not call the actions of the Ukrainian authorities, the Ukrainian army, armed groups' cruelty, absurdity, mistake. Let's give this a legal assessment. This is a war crime. According to international law, this is called genocide. The use of armed forces against civilians is, as colleagues from Lugansk have already noticed, chaotic shelling. This is causing material damage and moral harm to the inhabitants of Donbass. This is an economic blockade, a transport blockade. So we are talking about genocide, a war crime that doesn't have a statute of limitations. Until now, they are being investigated and prosecuted for acts of the Great Patriotic War. I ask you to turn our discussion towards practical steps to protect our children. Until Ukraine ends the armed aggression, to say that our children are protected. Today, on the 1st of June, we saw on the way here cheerful children with balls, in dresses, with bandages. And you understand that at any moment this can stop, because the shelling will begin. In frontline areas, it's no secret to anyone. Snipers randomly fire, and for the purpose of intimidation. Children go to school, a sniper shoots a wound. There is a sniper at a distance of 150-200 meters. Therefore, until the aggression ends, we cannot talk about any security of our children. And if our children end threatened, then our future is threatened, the future of our two states. Children born in the first year of the war have already completed the first grade. Now where? In any history of the world has an armed conflict occurred for so long and with such losses among the civilian population. In December 2020, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court finally announced that the statements are enough to recognize war crimes against the inhabitants of Donbass as massive and systemic, and he sees the composition of war crimes. This gives hope, but international authorities are very politicized, and it's possible to count on their objectivity. Numerous appeals to the courts of national jurisdiction of Ukraine, to the security service of Ukraine, to the office of the president of Ukraine don't give any result. Therefore, only appeals to the International Criminal Court, appeals to the United Nations and media coverage remain. I wish all children happiness, peace, and looking children in the eye, I promise that we are adults will do everything to protect you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. I'm sure, Alexander, you have something to add. Well, you've probably noticed that today we have a lot of women speakers, and probably such parallels can be drawn that it is not by chance, because women have quicker senses as for these things, they pass them through themselves. And by the way, speaking of Children's Day in 1949, the fact that the day was initiated by the International Democratic Federation of Women, they initiated is just date to exist. And I want to give the word to another woman, Anna Borisovna Soroka, first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the LPR, candidate of Legal Sciences, Associate Professor. Anna Borisovna, tell me, I've already addressed this question to Donetsk. Tell me, I know you have lots of information of what is happening on the contact line, where children also live. And the second question to you is to the lure about the prospects for the fact that those people who are responsible for those crimes, that they will not escape responsibility, that those crimes that crippled their people's lives will be still avenged. It will be additional question from me personally. Thank you.
For the 8th year, the people of Donbass have been living and fighting for the right to self-determination. Our national liberation movement has mobilized all possible resources, human, moral, spiritual, and heart. They were mobilized in order to fight to keep just their human shape. For the 8th year, we have been living in difficult conditions. But Let me say a few words. As a colleague from Donetsk has brought up the subject, namely about the ways of a fair trial over those criminals who are now committing crimes against the people of Donbass. It's not easy for us, because indeed our example is now the only example in history of a conscious, political and informational opposition to those criminal movements that are taking place on the territory of Ukraine. In addition to the national law enforcement system, which collects and records the consequences of these terrible acts every day, there are public forces that are also close to the residents of the frontline villages, doing everything possible to record and also to collect all the materials related to these crimes. And now, as a lawyer, I absolutely can't bring myself to say that this is just war crimes, that this is just genocide. I cannot say that in a call, let's just say, those really cynical, terrible acts that Ukraine is committing, simply crimes that goes beyond human understanding. We all said today that we have passed through. Our human history has gone through great stages of development. These are stages of civilization, we say formation. What is happening now is really hard to describe using ordinary vocabulary. What words can be used? How can we describe the suffering of a mother who is seeing her child off to school for the 7th years under shelling? The school bus, which people sometimes meet not just, with anxiety, but simply with tears in the eyes. Because the bus is sometimes stopped for more than 3 or 4 hours and the road is shelled. How to describe the suffering of the mother and father, loved ones who have lost their child, who went outside just for a walk. All this really touches the most delicate, perhaps, string of our soul and causes perhaps the greatest surge of strength and the desire for fight for justice. Our paths with Donetsk are similar. We also apply to the International Criminal Court. We have more than 600 claims that have already been accepted for consideration. We know about this and receive information from the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. We appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, where our citizens who have suffered from the Ukrainian aggression are also applicants, and we now understand that Ukraine is afraid of this. We know that we outweigh in the information flow that goes to the European Court of Human Rights.
Anna Borisovna, can I ask a question? As far as I understand, Ukraine has not ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court yet. But
Yes,
as far as I know, in 2015 it
Absolutely
applied
true.
to the statute.
And we are currently using this moment, and as Ukraine accuses the Russian Federation and us, respectively, of committing a number of crimes, we submit statements of
That is, the International Criminal Court has the right to try our claims.
Had the right to
Thank
try
you.
our claims. Absolutely right.
международным инстанциям.
I would like to appeal to all the international institutions which have been truly blind and deaf to the suffering of the inhabitants of Donbass for the 8th year. Children die here, they suffer. Why do namely the children of Donbass have to bear all this, and why nobody brings Ukrainian authorities to justice for these crimes? With all my heart, I dream that these photographs will never increase in number again. We call on the entire international community to see that these are the victims of the war unleashed by the Ukrainian government illegally and unreasonably.
I will add to what's been said by Anna Borisovna and Elena Nikolaevna. Alexander Nikolaevich was right when he said that since 1941 the Soviet Union began to talk about war crimes being committed, and this is what should really be learned and taken after in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic. To make the rhetoric a little bit more rigorous, somehow we are talking about indiscriminate shelling, but still I can't believe in indiscriminate shelling when a combat aircraft making an airstrike on the building of the former administration. We might suppose it didn't know, although in fact any pilot flies according to cartography, but suppose he didn't know that within the radius of 300 meters there is a working kindergarten where there were at that time more than 50 children on the playground. I can still believe in this, as in indiscriminative use of weapons, but when the 7th school was fired upon, when it was fired once, knowing there is a bomb shelter under it, you must understand that people who were in Счастье, Metalist, the so-called national battalions, well, among them were people from Lugansk region at that time. After all, they knew very well that it is a very old building and there is a bomb shelter under it. And the school was fired once. The school was fired on the second time. As a result of these, teenagers who were in our list of dead children of Lugansk People's Republic died. And it was fired on the third time with high explosive shells in order to burn down the building. Is this an indiscriminate use? This is specific shell fire directed against educational institutions, medical institutions, childcare facilities. From the facts that I personally know, 3 kindergartens in the city of Lugansk were badly damaged. This is what I saw with my own eyes. Right in the year 2014, there are actually more of them, and there are many more of them in the Republic. Now, when for the 7 years the school in Zolotoye has been under indiscriminate shelling, is this indiscriminate use a bullet? A bullet, a person who shoots understands perfectly well the direction in which it flies. And we need to learn to speak about the fact that Ukraine is purposefully trying to deprive the children of Donbass of the right to education and the right to life. And in general, our rhetoric, including appeals to international organizations, should be gradually made more rigorous. Because while we are restrainedly appeal to international law, maybe they really do not notice. But I agree with Alexander, when water dripping day by day wears the hardest rock away, and sooner or later justice will prevail. So what else must happen, or what should we do, or what we don't do, so that in the West, in the international media, just people who are outside Ukraine, outside Russia understand us, understand all of this? Here, Alicia, maybe you as the media representative can understand it. Maybe this is a real proofreading that we cannot influence. But maybe there are some streams that can carry these truths, and maybe we just need to strengthen the pressure. I don't understand. Can you somehow explain this situation from your point of view?
It's a very good question. In fact, we talk a lot about the conflict in Donbass with our foreign colleagues, and despite the fact that when you are here, it seems that both the authorities of the Republic and journalists are doing everything in order to convey the problems of this region. The fact that people are dying, objects of civilian infrastructure are being shelled here. Despite this and being here, it seems that you are also doing everything for this. Unfortunately, abroad, even journalists who, as it seems, should be familiar with the matter, let's say professionally, they don't fully understand what is happening here. I can tell you even people who come from the near abroad, let's say from Belarus, for example, they also don't fully understand, only when they find themselves here and seeing with their own eyes, standing near the school, when children say that there are shellings. Recently, we were also at the school in Zolotoye 5, near the school, and as soon as we moved away from the school, shelling on the residential sector began. Children were playing in the yard. An elderly man was sitting, and my colleague, he was also very surprised. He's not from here, from the Russian Federation, although this topic is also discussed in the media of the Russian Federation. However, probably it's necessary to talk about it, to inform the international community about it again and again. It seems to me that the reason for such an attitude of the West to this war and to the fate of our children is somewhat deeper. It seems to me that still we should proceed from what Europe gave birth to. Well, at least over the last 2 or 3 centuries, well, let's remember that it was Europe that gave rise to the ideology of racism, Nazism, fascism. But in fact, we must understand that our children are not their pain. So it's ridiculous to imagine that the Soviet Union would have appealed to some international organization during that war, or that it would inform that Europe about the horrors happening. And what would they have answered? So they don't feel compassion. I'm talking about the general mass. I'm not talking about individuals, but of course there are decent people, and I'm talking about the state policy according to which half people live here and there, and yes, there live gentlemen. Therefore, I think that it's necessary to change the system of international relations, the one where we become full-fledged, we are the Russian world, full-fledged partners in the political process, whose opinion is taken into consideration.
Anna Borisovna, you wanted to add something.
You know, I fully agree with Galina Ivanovna in the sense that yes, it's necessary to rebuild the system of international values, but also within our state, within the young republic, it's necessary to build a system to protect the rights of the child. First of all, protect our civilian population, primarily from direct shelling, protect our children from mine danger, and of course, do everything possible to change this